I am just amazed by his artistry, and I stand in profound awe of the gifts that he has to offer as a storyteller and as a writer. Dylan is an author, humorist, and appears on KYCY radio in San Francisco several times a week. And when he gets up here, you will know, as I do, why you dig him so much. It's impossible not to. He is wonderful. Mr. Dylan Brody.
Soul of an old-growth elm and a voice like single malt scotch. I met her once briefly with her dog, and she smiled so warmly that when I saw her again 4 years later, I recognized her immediately. A metaphor in motion, as elegant as any simile. Beverly Mickens, your host and MC. Let her hear it. I will be beginning tonight with a poem. It is called Corner of Starbucks and Christopher Street. I don't usually present poetry. I'll explain to you how this came about. About 2.5 weeks ago, just before Halloween, I had to come down to West Hollywood to get notes from a producer on a screenplay that he had previously said was perfect. For anyone here who is not in the entertainment industry, let me explain. Producers are very much like dogs. The more they like something, the more they need to pee on it. And this producer likes me a lot. So I was coming down to West Hollywood to be figuratively peed on, which is one of the top 10 reasons that people come to West Hollywood. And irony in that literally being peed on is one of the top 3. Now, you should know about me that I am compulsively punctual, but I am also neurotically status conscious. So I always get places early, but then I don't want to be the first person to arrive. So I had gone to West Hollywood with about an hour to kill, and I went into a coffee house to hang out. This turned out to be the best thing I have ever done in my life. This was so soothing to my ego. I was getting checked out like the Kama Sutra at a middle school library. And I'm not particularly homophobic, so for me, very, and before I go further, let me just say that I don't understand homophobia. It makes no sense to me. Very recently, a big debate. Oh, should we let gays marry? We can't let gays marry. And even the homophobes know that it's about bigotry. They have to cover it up. They know they can't say, we're not saying these guys can't hold down a committed relationship. We're just saying, when we think about what they do at home, it makes us go, ooh. So they make up excuses. Thank you. They make up excuses. We have to protect the sanctity of marriage. No. If you want to protect the sanctity of marriage, you don't stop some people from getting married. You outlaw divorce and unanticipated weight gain. And as I was sitting in this coffee house, a couple of men were sitting at tables sort of near to each other, and they were both sketching frantically. And they were sort of glancing over at each other as they sketched, and then they started sort of turning their sketchbooks so they could see, and it turned out they were both figuring out their Halloween costumes. And they bonded and moved together to one table to discuss how they were going to dress for Halloween. And I was reminded suddenly of Halloween 2 years ago, 2005. I was in New York to see my sister speak at NYU. My sister is gay. I love her like a brother. And she was at NYU to speak. She did a brilliant lecture over at a bunch of places based on the concept of welfare reform. And it was all about the fact that for the last 30 years, every substantial welfare reform proposal has been based on the concept that the best way to discourage people from being poor is to take away their money. And she takes this personally. She was briefly on government. I should explain. My sister has a beautiful daughter who was deliberately conceived in a loving act between my sister and a turkey baster that was briefly filled with mail-ordered sperm. Just one of the reasons I won't do Thanksgiving dinner at my sister's place. And she was briefly on government assistance when she was fired from a bartending job for breastfeeding her infant in the back room on a break. At an establishment, mind you, that proudly displays posters of the Coors Girls. Because we live in this bizarre society where it's okay to use breasts to sell beer, but not to feed children. And I'd gone to New York to see my sister, and I checked into a hotel, and then I went downtown to NYU. And as you may or may not be aware, I am compulsively punctual, but I'm also neurotically status conscious. So I had gotten downtown a little bit early, and I had time to kill. And it was Halloween evening in the East Village in New York. Men all around me, dressed up in their happiest fantasies. Men who had been out of the closet for years, had found darker, more secret closets in the back to open up and go out to work. I was standing at a corner at Christopher Street, waiting to cross the street, and right next to me was a young couple, a smallish man in a leather Speedo and a dog collar, and another man who was wearing leather chaps and a vest and a police-style hat, and I could tell it was a master-slave relationship because the one guy was holding the other guy's leash. And it occurred to me, not for the first time in my life, that we live in a wonderful world where if you wait long enough and you're open enough to the possibilities, anybody can find love. And I smiled at them, and they smiled at me, and then another young couple came frolicking past us dressed as sperm. They were wearing white leotards and tights. They had long toilet paper tails, and just in case we couldn't tell what they were singing as they went past. They sang, "Sperm, glorious sperm," and they danced on up the street, and the leather slave boy turned to his leather boy master and said, "Freaks." And I thought for the first time in my life that we live in a wonderful world where if you wait long enough and you're open enough to the possibilities, anyone can find somebody to judge harshly. But that was 2 years ago. 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting in this coffee house and these two young men are discussing their Halloween costumes, and I wondered whether if they had not met today, but rather had met on Halloween when they were in their costumes, rather than falling for each other, they would have judged each other and rolled their eyes and walked on. But now they were coming together, and it was a wonderful moment right there in front of me. And I wrote this poem. It's called Corner of Starbucks and Christopher. Sharpie-marked cups play name tag. Rich, dark Colombian meets slightly bitter French. A pretentious morning blend. They come together and claim to seek no more than the hot foam and the sweet macchiato. Thank you. I'm short on time and I have to sort of edit on the fly as I go, but because I am such an idiot and so wrapped up in performance, I took off my glasses for dramatic effect earlier and now cannot see my watch. I was going to close tonight's show with a big, very, very impressive piece. It's a guaranteed applause piece. I take sentences randomly from the audience, and then out of them I improvisationally weave monologues in the styles of well-known playwrights. And it is very impressive and very self-indulgent. And everybody goes, ooh, and then they clap. And I told my wife that I was planning to do this, and she said, no. And I said, no, it's good, it's great, it's a great piece, and everybody loves it, and my manager said it's going to be good. And she said, no, the stories are so good and so sweet, and better than that, and that is just an excuse for you to hear people say, hooray for Dylan, and clap. Now, in order for you to understand the significance of this statement to me, and the incredible intelligence and insight of my wife. You have to know this about me. When I was an infant, I became very, very ill. I got a very high fever. I was rushed to the hospital, I was packed in ice, I was bathed in alcohol. In order to bring my body temperature down, they wrapped me in sheets filled with ice and soaked in alcohol. And I was 4 months old and did not have language yet. So when my fever had broken, the only way they could find out if I had brain damage was to see if I still remembered the one thing I had learned to do. My mother would say, "Hooray for Dylan." And then I would clap. So in this hospital room, surrounded by worried parents and frantic doctors and concerned nurses, my mother said, "Hooray for Dylan." And I clapped, and there was applause and relieved adoration and hugging and love. Let's just review. The very first thing I learned on planet Earth was "Hooray for Dylan," and then applause. Why do I want something to suck on? So, I said to my wife, "Screw you, honey. I'm doing impressive improvisation." And she said, "Okay, you know, you talk to your manager, he said it's whatever you want to do." And she looked hurt. I have 13 years of martial arts training. I have 3rd-degree black belts in Hapkido and Taekwondo. I have no defense for my wife looks hurt. I adore my wife. I swear, for all the random flirtations with wait-try and steward-eye and sales clerks and hosts and MCs, I adore my wife. For all of my late-night psychosexual role play online with virtual strangers, I adore my wife. For all my rush hour drive time steering wheel demented fantasies of staged accidents and faked deaths, I adore this woman. So, in lieu of brilliant improvisation, I will be telling a story tonight that I dedicate to my wife. It is called Much Better, Thank You. And before I tell it, let me just say this to you. In lieu of means instead of. If you have been using it interchangeably with in light of, people like me have been judging you harshly. But we were too ashamed of our pompous judgmentalism to tell you and save you the embarrassment in the future. You don't have to tell anyone, just mark it away, know it for the future. I moved to Los Angeles with $500 in my pocket and a meeting with a producer who said he wanted to buy my very first screenplay. Ronald Reagan was president, although he didn't know it at the time. I went to the Paramount lot and I went to the producer's office. And he said that he loved me, he loved everything I had written, but he could not give me money for it until I had rewritten the second act. So I spent some of my $500 on a portable typewriter, and I went to a friend's apartment, and I slept on her couch, and during the day I sat on her floor, and I rat-a-tat-tatted at that little portable typewriter until I had a new draft. I got it Xeroxed, and I took my second draft to the Paramount lot right there in my hot little hands. I had hot little hands, although I did not know it at the time. And I went for my second meeting, and I found a custodian scraping the producer's name off the door of his empty office. And my triumphant arrival in Los Angeles was not exactly what I had thought it was going to be. But I had been a regular at the IMPROVisation in New York City since I was 17 years old. So I figured I could come down here to this club and put in for stage time, and I could get back to work, and everything was going to be fine. And I got here, and I was told that I could put my name in a hat on Sunday night, and if it was pulled out, I could open mic for 3 minutes. My warm reception at the IMPROVisation in Hollywood was not exactly what I had thought it was going to be. But I was arrogant and I was self-certain, and I could talk. So I convinced them to give me a proper showcase. And I came in here on a Tuesday night. And I pulled the MC aside and I said, "Listen, Expectations are very important. Before I come up, I want you to tell the audience that we have a very special guest tonight, that I've just come in from New York, where I was working in the film and television industry. All true, I've been a production assistant on Cagney and Lacey. And he said, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Go to the back of the room. So I did. And the comic before me came up, and he came off, and then the MC came up on stage, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, the Melrose Improv is very proud to present a special guest. And I heard a hush settle over the room. In those days, very special guests at the Melrose Improv were the reason people came here. And he said he just flew in from New York today, where he's been working on a major motion picture. And I could feel the vibration starting up in the room, and I could tell I was going to kill. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming. And my weight shifted forward out of the balls of my feet. I was standing over there by the soundboard. I was ready to come up on stage and blow the room away. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, Robin Williams. And Robin blasted past me, took the stage, sweated, and choked, and improvised for 45 minutes, and he was hilarious. And then he said, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and he got off the stage, and the entire audience, completely satisfied with the way they had spent their entertainment dollars, stood up and moved toward the exit as the MC came back up on stage and said, this next guy is Dylan Brody. He's going to showcase for us. Come on up, show us what you got. And I came up here and I told jokes into the microphone to a walking ovation. A room full of strangers who were bottlenecking at the egress. And my initial showcase here at the Melrose Improv did not go exactly the way I thought it was going to go. So I went up the street to, you know, the other club. And I got a job answering the phones that paid me not enough to rent an apartment. So at night, I would sleep on top of the club in a little depressed area there on the roof where people couldn't see me as they drove past, which I found out one rainy night was designed to channel water away from an entrance. So I found newspapers and I sort of dammed up a space for myself there, and from then on, when it was raining, I would hide in the club until they had locked up, and then I would sleep in a booth upstairs in a little workout room they had. Because I so internalized the status system of the club and the profession that even as a vagabond, I didn't feel I was ready yet for the main room. And one night after a show, a 45-year-old woman told me that I was very funny, so I went with her up to her house in the Hollywood Hills where I had sex with her and her husband because they gave me cocaine and hinted at a guest house I might be able to stay in. And as I walked down the long, dark, winding road to the club that night, I was incredibly happy because I was wired out of my mind on blow. And more importantly, she had said I was funny. And it didn't occur to me until many years later that I had been homeless and a prostitute. But that night, as I went to sleep in my little rain gutter tar paper depression, it did occur to me that my meteoric rise to stardom was not going exactly the way I had thought it was going to. I began to get work on the road, and I went out into clubs all over the country, and I took the stage in double-breasted bravado, and I prayed that the audience could not see through my witty jokes to find out that I was a freak. And I was not Bill Hicks, and I was not Lenny Bruce, and my powerful commitment to the truth was not exactly what I had thought it was going to be. And then after the show, I would work the crowd, or I would haunt the local bars looking for women who might act out my bizarre fetishes and dark perversions, and failing to find them, I would weep alone in stoned hotel rooms, and I was not Hawkeye Pierce, and I was not James Bond, and my psychosexual persona was not what I had thought it was going to be. And then I sold my first book, and I thought I can come in off the road, I can relax. And I got an advance for the book that was not enough to pay off the debts I had accrued on the way to selling my first book. And in the first year that the book was on the market, we sold 9 copies. And my explosion on the worldwide literary scene was not exactly what I had thought it was going to be. And then I met this woman. I was in a coffee house, and I met this woman. And I chatted with her, and I talked, and I flirted, and we talked late into the night. She kept giving me free refills. And she thought I was very funny. And I asked her on a date, and she said she would go on a date with me. And I was incredibly happy, because it occurred to me, possibly for the first time, that we live in a wonderful world where if you wait long enough and you're open enough to the possibilities, anyone can find love. And as I was driving home that night from the coffee house, I was incredibly happy because I was wired on caffeine. And more importantly, she had said I was funny. But as I went to sleep that night, the coffee drained out of my system, and it occurred to me that any life we could have together, and I could imagine a life with this woman, but it would be a life of secrecy and shame and hidden horrors. And so I showed up for our first date, dragging a duffel bag of coke-whore shame and pushing my self-loathing in front of me like a stolen shopping cart full of rain-soaked obsolete newspapers. In between the crab cakes and the shrimp risotto, I unloaded my baggage on the table. And this woman, this amazing woman, this woman whose only flaw is that she turns the map to face the same direction that she's traveling, leaned across the table and scratched the side of my head and said, "You're just a little freak, aren't you?" And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the first 13 and a half years of marriage have not been exactly what I thought they were going to be. They've been much better. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out and supporting storytelling. Thank you to Eric Abrams and the Improv for having us in and having the courage not to present a joke every 15 seconds. You guys have been terrific. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen.